Well, all right. We have a big news story that's breaking here on a Sunday afternoon as DeAndre Hopkins has he found a team now. One of the biggest questions was where was he going to go, and it's a surprise to me as it's actually the Tennessee Titans who end up landing Hopkins. They give him 2 years, $26 million. That's the base deal. There's also another $6 million of incentives, so a chance to earn roughly $3 million a year more due to incentives. I'm assuming those are going to be playing time incentives, given that's kind of the biggest question mark with Hopkins at this point in his career. I think Hopkins is still an incredible player when he's on the field, but from being a guy who, looking at his snap count, he had 999 snaps his rookie year, and then from 2013 to 2020, he had, so he had at least 999 snaps. So, 1,000 snaps every other year. The past 2 years, he's been in the 500s both years. And again, there was a suspension involved that, knocked one of those way down, then an injury. But it's still only been 2 years, and he still is just 31. Can Hopkins play? There is a question mark, which is why he isn't getting a huge deal, and which is why he got cut by the Cardinals, who would have owed him a ton had they kept him. That being said, though, this feels like a very fascinating and very good move for the Tennessee Titans to bring him in. For one thing, I think a lot of people have kind of talked about that division as it's the Jaguars and everybody else at this point. I don't think Tennessee views it that way. They were very close to winning that division just last season. If it wasn't for a Josh Dobbs fumble late in that Week 18 game, they win that game and win the division, and that was with all the injuries they had. The biggest issue with the Titans, I thought, was they really missed A.J. Brown, and honestly, Hopkins can absolutely be an A.J. Brown replacement. His talent is, we've seen better years from him than we have seen from A.J. Brown. That's just the reality of the situation. Now, maybe you haven't seen those in a few years now, which is the question mark, and, I'm not saying you would rather have Hopkins than Brown, just given due to the age thing. I'm just saying, in that offense, they could really use a number one receiver. They really missed a number one receiver, and now they have a guy who could be a number one receiver. So, from Tennessee's perspective, part of me wonders a little bit of, is this maybe them acknowledging a bit that A.J. Brown trade was a mistake in hindsight, that probably they should have kept him and made sure they had that number one receiver? Maybe, or maybe it's just them realizing, hey, we made a move to try to save some money and, get rid of a star player, but keep, be able to spend that money elsewhere. We haven't really been able to replace him the way we thought we would year one. So now we're just doing this to make sure we can replace that at a cheaper deal, which would be the case. Also, it is a new regime now, new GM now than it was then. So I don't know exactly. The other interesting factor, I think, in all of this is the teams that didn't sign DeAndre Hopkins. Because the reality is, 2 years, $13 million a year, for a guy with the upside of DeAndre Hopkins, that doesn't seem that crazy. And it kind of makes me think, even for some of these teams that are just rebuilding, if you're a team like the Houston Texans or the Carolina Panthers, why not throw a bag of money at him? I know the Patriots have desperately wanted a number one receiver. They decide to not do this, to not send a deal. And again, maybe he wants to play in Tennessee. I could see that. Seems like a cool place to live. I get it. So if that's what he wants, maybe that factors in. Maybe New England offered him the same amount of money, and he said, you know what, I don't need to spend my winters up there. I'll go down to Tennessee, which isn't quite as cold. I'm from Florida, where everything feels cold. But in that perspective, maybe that's the case. I don't know. It's just a fascinating situation. I think there's a lot of teams that I think a lot of fan bases in particular are going to be saying, why didn't we go out and get DeAndre Hopkins? But the Tennessee Titans, who haven't always been the team that's making these big splash moves to get the star players, sometimes been making this big splash moves to get rid of the star players, now they're getting a potential star player. They're not rebuilding yet in Ryan Tannehill's contract year, because that's another very fascinating aspect about this, I think. Ryan Tannehill, I think this is another way where it gives you some insight in a way as to what Tennessee is currently doing. Ryan Tannehill in his last year of his deal. And I think a lot of people kind of felt like, okay, They drafted Will Levis. They have a plan B now. If Tannehill doesn't light the world on fire, could this be his last year as a starter for the Tennessee Titans? Could they say, you know what, you're a good player, but not quite good enough that if we're going to pay you a big deal, we can win a Super Bowl with you? Maybe the addition of DeAndre Hopkins is kind of saying, no, we still believe in this roster and we still think we can be successful. It's just a very fascinating thing. So yeah, as a whole with this, I am a fan. In general, I'm typically going to be a fan of these moves. That's just my mindset, is if you have a player who's 31, who has still been effective when on the field, again, if you look at his PFF grades, they're not quite as promising. He's typically a guy who's high 80s, low 90s year in and year out, but the last 2 years, he was just shy of 80 in 2021, and then a 72.9 grade in 2022. Although worth mentioning, the biggest area where he's dropped has been blocking, according to PFF grades, so maybe you're not as concerned about that as much, although the receiving grade has dropped a little bit there as well. So that's just another thing to bring up. But yeah, what does this mean for, so who are the winners and losers of this? What have we learned from Hopkins here? The winners, obviously, I think the Titans are big winners. I think the Jaguars are kind of losers here. Jaguars felt like maybe they had a weak division that could be easy, but the Titans are not going away anytime soon. I think Ryan Tannehill is a huge winner in this. For one thing, hey, contract year, always nice if you're a quarterback in a contract year to get a star wide receiver come to town. That's always helpful. You'll always take that for sure. So I do think that this could help him. And maybe a loser in this could be Will Levis, a guy who is trying to beat out Ryan Tannehill. And to some degree, if you're a second-round pick, it's hard to win the starting job. Usually the starter has to lose it. And so I could see that kind of scenario happening where, if Tannehill just plays good enough for Will Levis, maybe he just doesn't get that opportunity. Patriots are losers. All those teams that were rumored to get him and chose not to, I think are losers, because I really do. I've made a video, I'll plug it. I made a video on this channel. If you just search Jackson Kruger Sports, DeAndre Hopkins, it'll come up this offseason of me talking about how, why I still think he's good and why I still think he's effective. His tape is not bad by any means. His tape still makes him look like a number one wide receiver. And if the Titans now have Derrick Henry, who obviously takes so much attention, teams pay so much attention to him, you now have all these other guys who, their receiving core got a lot of criticism last year, and I'm not saying it was unfair, but the main reason they were criticized is because they had a bunch of role players, but maybe not the one true number one guy who can win against one-on-one matchups. Well, now they have that guy. The role players don't have to try to play above their head and can just simply be role players, and this could potentially be a good offense. And if it's even if it's just like a solid offense, they should have a good defense as well. You could never count out Mike Vrabel. The Titans, maybe you can't be totally slept on. I don't know, but definitely you can never count this team out. I think so. Yeah, those are my thoughts on Hopkins joining the Tennessee Titans. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.